I'd love to see astrology as we are co-creating with it. It is modeling clay, and we are co-creating with it to produce the most loving, beautiful world that we can possibly produce. And how do we do that? An analogy I often use that it's our unique sheet of music, which you can either butcher or play with the London Philharmonic and make it, have a magnificent life that
Yeah.
touches and helps a lot of people.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Practical Spirituality. This is my interview series where I am talking to fellow practitioners, getting their insight and their perspective on what actually is going on with this current chapter of human history and how are they navigating it through their medicine, through their work, and through their personal worldview. I am so thrilled to welcome Pam Gregory today. She is one of my favorite astrologers, and like some of the other conversations I've been having in this series, I am feeling a little bit like an excited fan. I've been following your work for quite some time, Pam. I am thrilled to have you here. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, Amar. Thank you for the opportunity and the invitation, and really delighted to share with you today. And thank you for the work you're doing in the world as well.
Yeah, I think that it takes a village. I really do feel like I was talking with my last guest was Jane Allison, who's a tarot reader and astrologer, and she's a fellow Virgo. So I was talking to her about, I feel like it's the hermit card in the tarot. Like the hermit is now coming down off the mountain into the town square. And I feel like the democratization, I guess you could say, of media through things like YouTube, I think has really been a beautiful parallel to where we are collectively as humans sharing an experience. That now there are so many resources and so many sources of information. And what I love about your work, Pam, is your approach from my perspective is one where the mystical, and a lot of this I think is about normalizing the mystical, but you're just very matter of fact with these very otherworldly experiences that we're going through. So I'd love to know a little bit more about how you came to astrology, and then we can talk about your personal views. So tell anybody who's watching, and I'd love to know as well, how did you come to this work?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. After university, literally the next day, I'd always wanted to immigrate to Canada since I was 14 years old. I got on a plane to Toronto with $100, flew to Toronto, knew no one, no job, literally started from the ground up from zero. And in that first week, I joined a yoga class, and yoga classes, as you know, were always pretty silent, but there was a big guy from Jamaica there, and a couple of the girls at the end of the class said he's an astrologer. So I went up to say hello, and I said, look, I know nothing about astrology, but I'd love you to do my chart. And a week later, I went to see him in his tiny flat in Toronto. I remember it like it was yesterday, and I spent 7 hours with him,
Wow.
and it just cracked my world open. And I haven't stopped since. I haven't stopped since that day, really. So that was
That
yeah,
is
that was
so
massive.
beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Would you
Big time of personal growth.
Would you say that you had a spiritual bent or spiritual leaning prior to that? Was this something you were connected to or aware of?
I think since a child, actually, and uh, I grew up in northeastern England, which was a very poor area, and in a very tiny village. We were cut off with snow every year for a couple of months. There weren't any other children of my age in the village. It was quite solitary in a way, but we had woods behind the house. And I've always been a huge animal lover, and I'd disappear with my dog and into the woods. And really, I lived honestly, I think like Caliban at weekends, really. I made a bivouac in the woods and I'd just disappear. And nature and animals have always been my kind of salvation, my touchstone. And so from quite an early age, I just started to have a real kind of spiritual interest and read some pretty heavy books when I was 7, 8, 9 years old. And looking back, I was thinking, God, I must have been quite a serious child. But I suppose because I had a very isolated, quite a dysfunctional childhood as well, but quite an isolated childhood. Nature, my dog, and books were my friends. So that spiritual quest started at a very, very young age, I think. And I was also, because of things that were happening with my parents, I was exploring on deeper pathways for sure. Yeah.
That's so fascinating. It's something that is very parallel to my childhood, having grown up in rural Wyoming in the mountains outside of Yellowstone Park, and it's a gorgeous place to live. I actually am back here living with my father for a while. But it wasn't necessarily the most wonderful place to grow up for a kid like me. And I had friends, but I was very solitary as well. And there was just this sense of there's something deeper. And I think my ability to see through the physical experience and sense what was really happening, I think that in and of itself sort of set me apart from, just feeling like a normal everyday human. Although who even knows what that is these days?
Absolutely. I dream about being normal. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Wonder about what would that be like to be a normal human. But I love that idea of, it sounds to me like there was a deeper current that was sort of moving you along and guiding you in some way to pay attention to things that maybe not everybody was paying attention to.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, for sure. And because of, as I say, things that were happening with my parents, there was a need to be emotionally self-sufficient
Yeah.
from a very, very young age. And that stood me in very good stead, I have to say. So, when we have challenging childhoods, I think it can act as very powerful fertilizer and fuel for who we are meant to become.
Yeah.
I feel that very strongly. So I'm actually very grateful for the challenges now that I went through at a very early age. Yeah.
And isn't that beautiful? I mean, nothing is wasted, right? Whatever perspective we're taking, I think we can begin to see that everything has its place. And to your point, oftentimes it's in hindsight that we can see the gift of difficulty or challenges or really, really hard times, especially as a kid. And I think that what I love about your story is that it feels to me like when you connected with astrology, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels to me it was like putting on something that felt quite comfortable and familiar, or a sense of like, oh, yes, I found something here that's important.
Yeah, 100%. It was a real epiphany, Amar, a real epiphany. And it kind of really started to make sense of all, this happens to everybody, doesn't it? Who stumbles into astrology one way or another. It makes sense of all of the previous years. And the astrologer who was just wonderful, his name was Astor, which is so like Astra, Latin for
Yeah.
star. It's kind of a crazy, wonderful earth angel being. And he went back and gave me dates in my childhood where dramatic things had happened, and they were actually spot on time. And so there was no doubt that there was something in this funny old subject called astrology. And I was mentioning this the other day, but I recorded the interview on a cassette tape. That's how long ago this was. And I lost the tape through various house moves. And eventually I decided after 5 years, the winters got to me and I was leaving Toronto and coming back to, well, I was actually spending 5 months in India and Nepal to break myself into a lower standard of living, which did the trick. But I was coming back to the UK. And in packing up the cardboard boxes for the house move, I was leaving Canada forever that day. And I found the tape, so I was playing the cassette tape in the background as I was packing boxes. And his voice was saying, September the 18th in this particular year, I think it was about 1979. But anyway, this particular year, that will be a major turning point in your life. And within the next 4 to 6 weeks, you will be achieving one of the major highs in your life. And in that time period, I was then at 19,000 feet in the Himalayas. So it was a
Wow.
very literal high. And so I haven't stopped since then. It was such a powerful epiphany. And of course, I know I've done this in previous lifetimes. I even know who I was in some lifetimes as an astrologer. So, we keep going around the track, don't we? And I'm just so grateful that I kind of stumbled into it. But of course, I didn't stumble into it. It was all meant to be.
Right. It was always calling you back home. It was always guiding you in some way. But that's what I love so much about the human experience is that we get to have the joy of discovery, sometimes the horror of discovery, depending on what the information is, but that beautiful spiral that we're always on and how it comes up through a higher octave, but it's the same experience, just maybe in an elevated way or maybe even a diminished way. But I love that sense of coming home that it sounds like you had when you found astrology or it found you again, I guess. I'm curious to know from your perspective and having done this as a vocation and as a focus of your life, what have you seen change? I mean, we spoke about this briefly in the beginning about how now with internet and social media and there's a platform for everybody pretty much. As long as you have a device that records and an internet connection, you can have a channel. And from your perspective, what have you seen just as an astrologer, someone who's seen the different iterations of our spiritual community? What do you see has been the shift from what I'm assuming was a time when not a lot of people were talking about it openly, or, your book, you don't really believe in astrology, do you? Like, are you serious? So, what for you has been your journey of seeing the expansion of this knowledge and this wisdom?
Yeah, yeah, great question, Amar. So, I had to call my first book that because at the time I was working in corporate life, and I'd been promoted to the board at a young age, at 28, etc., and was respected in what I was doing. But if by any chance clients discovered I was interested in astrology, they'd kind of take me off to a corner and kind of in a conspiratorial whisper say, "Now, come on, you can tell me. You don't really, you can't possibly because you've gone from someone who's clearly competent to someone who's in need of serious therapy."
Yes, is everything
That
okay,
was
Pam? Are you sure?
yeah, yeah, it's this grand canyon of misunderstandings. So at that point, I just had to quit corporate life and do what I was meant to do. But yes, in the ways you've described, Amar, from really being kind of way off in terms of not part of normal life at all, there has been so much democratization. I think that's a great word, and popularization of astrology. So I think so many people need guidance right now in the times we're in. So, we just didn't have all this social media when I was learning. It was almost like you had to go to a very secret mystery school to study. And it felt like that, it felt secret and it felt sacred and it felt just beautiful that you were continuing some sacred lineage. And that felt really precious, but now it's kind of much more out there. And I think that's a good thing because people need guidance. But I think the other thing I would say, and it's something I'm really trying to do in my own practice, is moving from a very fatalistic astrology
Yeah,
of planets do things to you and don't go out today because you're likely to have an accident and don't drive and putting us very much in victim mode
yeah,
to what I'd love to see astrology as we are co-creating with it. It is modeling clay and we are co-creating with it to produce the most loving, beautiful world that we can possibly produce. And how do we do that? How do we, an analogy I often use that it's our unique sheet of music, which you can either butcher or play with the London Philharmonic and make it, have a magnificent life that
yeah.
touches and helps a lot of people. The pattern is set, but our latitude is in our free will of how we play it.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah, Paul Selig, his guides say you can learn to bake a cake in the gutter or you can learn to bake a cake in a five-star kitchen. That is where you have the leeway to decide what is the quality of my experience going to be. And I often liken it to a road trip. If you're driving cross country from Los Angeles to New York, you know where you're going ultimately, but in between, you can go wherever you want, make byways and little side trips and stop for a night or two at the Grand Canyon or whatever. And I do, I love when you're talking about how it used to be this very secretive, knock on the door three times and give them the password sort of idea. And, part of me really misses that. I remember, and I don't, in the middle of Wyoming, I don't know how I found a deck of tarot cards at the age of like 14, and I didn't even know what they meant. I just remember like, what are all these sticks and swords? And I don't understand what any of this means. But there was something very magical about that connection. I knew that there was something important about this. And on the one hand, we're not in the sub rosa mystical magical time anymore. I mean, now you can buy crystals at Walmart for God's sake. It's not like, it's not this hidden thing anymore, which I think on the one hand does sometimes maybe dilute the power and the meaning of these lessons. And at the same time, I'm going to say it again, normalizing the mystical. I think that is the way we can use the popularization of this information is to see that, yes, I check the weather app on my phone to see what's happening outside. I may draw a few tarot cards to see what's the mood or the energy of the day. I may check an astrology chart just to see what's happening in the world to help me perhaps glean a clear understanding. But I love the idea of using it as a practical means to navigate the world. And what I see is these systems of information like astrology and tarot, and even some of the modern ones like the gene keys or human design. It's not telling us who we are. It's giving us information so that we can come back to the truth of what we really are, which is that eternal infinite being. And I think that to your point, Mercury retrograde is a perfect example, right? Like, oh, don't turn on your computer, don't book a flight, don't do anything. Mercury's not out to get you. It's not.
I was born with Mercury retrograde.
Oh, were
Hasn't slipped
you?
me up yet in communicating. So so all this stuff about Mercury retrograde, I tend to put on one side because, is it that there's been so much coverage of Mercury retrograde that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy? The
Yeah,
printer breaks down, your car doesn't work. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah,
so we can create our own limitations in that way. And I think what you're saying is so true, Amar, because it isn't I use it as an aid to judgment. It's like if it's like looking at the weather forecast, but if you know there's a big rainstorm coming, and it doesn't actually. I mean, I go out in any weather, it's not negotiable, but that wouldn't stop me going out, but I would dress accordingly for the rainstorm.
yeah.
And so it's an aid to judgment of how I live my life, but I won't be dominated by it. I won't use it prescriptively in that way or dogmatically. I'll say, okay, I now know what the energy is like. I mean, for instance, as we're recording this, there's some massive energy coming up this weekend with the new supermoon in Taurus. It's very combative, it's very combustible, it's very forceful, etc. And so that would help me to say, okay, don't have a discussion that could easily lead to an argument.
Right.
Don't spark that with a friend who has very different views. See them next Tuesday as opposed to tomorrow.
Right. Not the day to open up the political, landscape of what's happening, maybe not necessarily. And I love that's one of the things that I think drew me to your work. And what I love hearing you say is that yes, astrology is real, but it's not a prison. It's not here to limit you. It's actually here to uplift you and give you more of the complete picture, just so that you know, right? Knowledge is power. I'd love to know, and you already touched on this a bit about your initial reading with that guy Astor. What for you personally is astrology? I mean, obviously it's something you love and you respect, but from you, for your experience in the day-to-day human world, what does astrology mean for you?
Great question. Really good question. Firstly, it's a language. Because when people say to me, the title of my first book, you don't really believe in astrology, do you? Well, that's like saying, well, you don't really believe in French, do you?
Right.
You
Right.
know, it's a completely nonsensical question
Yeah.
because it's just a language. It's a language which you have to learn with rules and grammar and it's also a sacred language. There's something that is divine about astrology. It's sacred. It isn't like French, which isn't a sacred thing. Astrology is sacred. It comes from the mystery schools, and it reminds us all of our divinity, our unique divinity and our unique essence. And so when I'm working with it, I like to hold sacred space, before I start prepping anything or coming on video or having I did it again today before I start this conversation with you, Amar. It was let this be for my highest good, the highest good of Amar, and myself, highest good of all, highest good of the earth, because I want to retain that sense of sacredness and the reminder of our divinity. And I think that's where astrology can be different from other modalities of helping our self-understanding in some way, it has that quality to it that I would never want to lose, because that really is the essence of it, I think. Because here we're talking about a planetary language, a language of the cosmos, and I think our understanding of the cosmos is going to expand and expand as our consciousness is expanding. And that's another, and you touched on it, Amar, actually just a moment ago. It's not that astrology limits our choice, it expands our choices. Because once we understand who we are and what our sheet of music is, that's going to open up many more choices in terms of how can I be the best version of myself?
Mm,
How can I expand my potential and possibilities in any moment? How can I today be the highest version of myself? And our conversation today is part of that playing out for me.
yeah. Yeah. And
Mm.
I think that, when you're talking about the sacredness of it and how it is a language that, while it was a system that perhaps humans configured, it was definitely a channeled thing, right? It's divinely inspired. It is spirit, the great mystery, whatever you call that, moving through you and guiding you to construct a model of something that transcends the human experience. Because what I find is, what I call the capital T truth, the things that are eternally true, when something is true, it's true on all levels. So no matter how minimized my perspective is or how expanded it might be, astrology will always meet me, and these divine languages will always meet somebody where they are. And it is like this endless discovery of you start to pull the thread and you just see how there's more and more and more. And then you can pull in, other modalities like tarot and astrology and how they align and, sort of support one another and co-create together. I find that to be fascinating. It's like the writing has always been there. We just have to have the eyes to see it and the willingness to open our mind to perceive it. And I love that perspective that for you, it's a sacred language.
Yeah, it really is. And that will never change, I think. I feel that very profoundly. And that's why I think it just touches something so deep in me. And I never just want it to be a reading for somebody's, that feels like it kind of trivializes it
Yeah.
somehow. But what I also love to do, I mean, I love to go down rabbit holes, and luckily the people who watch my stuff, seem to enjoy the same rabbit holes.
Yeah.
But I love to explore kind of quantum physics and consciousness and galactic beings and galactic heritage, because we are galactic beings ourselves, and channeling with angels. I love to look at the science and the groundedness, but also um, the high spiritual side as well. And when you have different people all saying the same thing from their very different backgrounds and perspectives, that's when it gets exciting. That's when it gets really exciting for me to put those pieces together. And I think, right, that kind of synthesis, I think is what I particularly enjoy, always using astrology as my language.
That's beautiful. Yeah, because it is, if we start to weave together the different threads, and I think music is a divine language, mathematics and geometry is a divine language. We've taken bits of this and turned it into, modern medicine and physics and all of that. But even that, you see the face of God, if you will, in those practices and those modalities. And I think increasingly, and I'd love your perspective on this, one thing that I've been saying, and a lot of what my guides have been telling me over and over, is that humanity is rapidly approaching a time when the languages that we have used to describe our human experience are going to start to fail. The things that we have said are true, and these are the facts of what it is to be a human, and the facts of politics, or the facts of medicine, or the facts of whatever. We're going to start to see that, yes, there's a kernel there, but a lot of the theories and a lot of the things that we've said are factual are actually quite flawed. And I think we're really coming to the place where, and that's again, normalizing the mystical. You can't, once that door is open, I say you can't unring a bell. And once that bell is rung, you can't not see the correlations and the connections everywhere. So, and perhaps you see this in the astrology of this great awakening that we are in the midst of. I think, especially with Pluto and Aquarius, in the next few years, I don't think anybody is going to be untouched by this level of this mystical information starting to come in. Now, whether or not they accept it is up to them. But what are your thoughts on this big awakening that humanity is currently in the midst of?
Yeah, I think it's immensely exciting, Amar. Um, and one part of it is people waking up to the fact that pretty much everything we've known about science, biology, history, whatever, I think is just going to hit a wall. And that could be shocking for many people, but it's part of that, oh my goodness gracious, so what is reality, and starting to search elsewhere. But it's very much embedded in the astrology.
Mm,
We can quote so many things, the end of the Yuga cycle, the all of the outer planets changing sign within this very short period of time, the next 14 months, which is just extraordinary. The planetary geometry, I've talked about the video Metamorphosis for Humanity and the big picture, all of that is extraordinary. But then you add in things like the myths from the Hopi and the Mine people and the Quero talking about this particular time. You look at the fact that the Earth is moving through the galactic current sheet, and that only happens every 12,000 years, give or take 500. You look at the level of high frequency light coming onto the Earth and how that's changing, stimulating our DNA, to remember some of these incredible gifts and skills we had when we were more elevated humans. And I think the reconnection to our galactic family is going to become a bigger and bigger part, particularly after Uranus moves into Gemini in July. I mean, Uranus is the planet of the galactics, Gemini's communication. So we already have many people channeling the Palladians, the Arcturians, the Andromedans, all over YouTube, don't we? All over
yeah.
YouTube. But I think that's going to become a much more common experience for people because we are galactic. That's where we've come from.
Yeah.
And so, as I understand it, the galactic beings are keeping a very close watch on what's happening with Earth right now, because we are a key piece of their continued evolution as well. So it gets very exciting. So I'd love people to shift from that fear of, oh my God, the world's going to hell in a handbasket, to shift your focus over here to really lock on to love and excitement and joy, and link together with like-minded people who are creating communities all over the world. And I know they are because they write to me all the time
Yeah.
about, we've bought this land and we're coming together and we're doing wonderful things. That's happening everywhere, all over the world. And it's fabulous. And I think the young people in particular, very young people, I mean, every day pretty much on Facebook, I post innovations from
Yeah.
school children who are inventing free energy in their African village. The three African girls who, literally schoolgirls, who are inventing free energy through their urine. Because the urea, yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
That's
The
insane. I
urea
love
in
that.
their urine, they found can act as a fuel to produce electricity. I mean, it's mind-blowing. So every day, to be very super positive on Facebook, I share some of these incredible scientific breakthroughs. And these children are very ecologically and environmentally aware. And they are big time focused on cleaning up the oceans, cleaning up the earth. I mean, there's a chap called Boyan Slat, who I think is an Eastern European chap, and he's no longer a child. I think he's in his 30s now. But when he was very young, he set up a non-profit making venture called Ocean Cleanup. And he invented essentially a very simple big scoopy thing, which, you know, which cleans up 99% potentially of floating plastic pollution in the world's oceans.
Wow.
And he's got volunteers all over the world helping in that project. Now, that's incredible. Isn't that fabulous?
Yeah.
So, the young people, particularly, I think, are going to be a big part of the visionaries and the progressives and the innovators going forwards, and the way society is going to be structured, because it's going to be very allied to the Aquarius energy, is no longer going to be top down, the old greybeards telling us what to do, because we are absolutely friggin' done with that.
Yeah.
It's going to come, it's going to be a much more horizontally based society with brilliant minds, innovators, etc., visionaries, having ideas which other people say, I want to be on your team. I want to help to create that idea and bring it into manifestation in the world. So there's a kind of excitement of teams coming together like that and rapidly turning the mess around that that older generations have created.
Yeah, absolutely.
In our ignorance. And so I see things happening rapidly, partly because of the energy, partly because of the DNA being reactivated, partly because of the genius of these young people who are already activated, they're already turned on. And I think in a really short space of time, we're going to see a very different world. I mean, I really see the next 3 years as being extraordinary, and by the end of 2027, almost unrecognizable to where we are right now.
Yeah.
You know,
I love that, and I would, as a tourist astrologer, I'm certainly not an adept by any means, but I just keep coming back to Pluto and Aquarius. And to me, Aquarians, my mother's an Aquarius, and there are times when I look at her and I'm like, what level are you operating on mentally? Like she is just so, in a good way, so far beyond what most humans walking around. And I think Aquarius is the future traveling back in time to say, okay, are you ready for me? I'm going to guide you forward. And there was another astrologer recently, and I can't remember his name, but he was basically saying by 2027, we are going to be looking back on even 2020 as, something as quaint as the covered wagon, because that we are going to be in such a rapid corridor of acceleration, it's going to blow our minds. And to your point, and this is something that I have been saying over and over is that the idea of ascension, it's happening now. This concept of the new earth is available to you now, should you be interested in tapping into it. And, the telepathy tapes is the example I've been using a lot lately is how, the graybeards of the medical establishment had relegated these non-speaking individuals. Oh, these poor autistic children, they're going to be wheelchair bound or institutionalized, or they're just never going to have a full life. Meanwhile, this woman, I can't remember her name, but she was talking about her daughter, realizing her daughter speaks like 7 languages. She didn't even know. Her daughter is fluent in hieroglyphics to the degree that they will show her a hieroglyphic that she has never seen, and she will know what it means, what the context is, and they will reference that with, it's sort of these double-blind experiments they're doing. All of that is to say, you can't ignore it. It's getting to the point where these revolutionary awakenings and emergence of this new human is everywhere. Like you almost have to try really hard to not see it. So, from my perspective, and to your point, I think that a lot of where we are is that humans and Earth, we are taking our place back at the galactic table, if you will. Like, it's sort of like we've been exempt from the UN for the past 40,000 years, and now we've been invited back to the table to be a part of the conversation. And let's be honest, maybe humans weren't the best ones to have in the mix previously. Um, but all of this to me, I would say this to me is an example of ascension and what is happening right now. And I would love your perspective because ascension is one of those mythological things that we have talked a lot about in our spiritual circles. And I find sometimes the perspective is I'm just waiting for the galactic fleet to land and save me. It's not about saving anybody. It's about us remembering our true nature and our power and our divinity and deciding to use that for benevolent reasons. But I would love your perspective on this whole thing we call ascension. What does that even mean to you?
Yeah, great question, Amar. Firstly, on the telepathy tapes, I mean, because I work a lot with Veda Austin,
Hmm.
who's doing incredible work with the autists, as they like to call
Yeah.
themselves, and putting together a docu-series in America. And when she started to speak with them, and said, she would love to work with them, one of the autists said, "Are you ready for us?"
Mhm.
Which I thought, a great question. Are you ready for it?
Yeah.
So it's like through whatever created the autism, they've made a leap. They made a leap to a much higher level of consciousness. And Veda is feeding me back certain responses to questions I have about astrology. And it's absolutely friggin' mind blowing. I mean, I have to sit down with a cup of tea and sort of go through the answers several
Orbit,
times
yeah.
to kind of integrate. I mean, they are way ahead of us in their consciousness, which is so exciting. They're going to be our leaders and our teachers and our, they are wise savants, aren't they? And so look at that leap that's been made so quickly. So for me, ascension is partly a remembrance of who we were when we were much more evolved back in Lemurian times, and we lived in harmony with nature, and we had this connection to oneness and everything being in a harmonious relationship. So we'd never hurt another living being. And it was beautiful. We could heal people. We lived in the light body, essentially. We could heal people. We operated on telepathy. It's that kind of a remembrance I think we're headed back to. But at its simplest, I think it's really an expansion of our consciousness.
Yeah.
It's an expansion of our consciousness so we can rise from this density to a higher level of being, which is much more based in love and joy and peace and freedom, big word, freedom, and gratitude. And it's here right now.
Yeah.
We just step into it in a second. So it isn't that we change place or we migrate on a spaceship to another planet. We stay on Earth, but we have a heightened perception, heightened senses of everything that's happening on Earth with a very different point of focus. I mean, I have some dear, dear friends who are much more normal than I am. And I can be walking with them in the woods, and I've known them for decades, and I love them to bits. And we're walking along, a couple of feet apart, and I've known them for years, and they will be seeing the world from their focus as pretty dire.
Yeah.
Doom and gloom, World War III, we're done for. And I will be just 2 feet away in ecstasy, looking at the blossom and the new green leaves coming out, saying, wow, look at this, and this, you can feel the life force in the trees and in nature. So we are walking along together in completely different realities. And I don't judge that because we're all on our soul's journey. And a few years ago, I was in that place, and now I'm in a different place. And it all comes down to where you're putting your attention, where you're putting your focus, because you can't be in love and fear at the same time. You have to choose. They're two different ends of the stick.
Yeah.
So if you're in fear, watching the news, following the narrative, you're going to be in the gloom and doom brigade. If you have the kind of awareness to shift towards love and joy and faith and make that choice in every moment. Nah, I'm not going to listen to that. Nah, I'm turning that off. Nah, I'm not going to read that somebody sent me. I'm going to focus over here and stare into a rose for 5 minutes and see the pattern in the rose. That's what I'm going to do right now. Or listen to the bird song. And that may seem incredibly kind of trivial and simple in a way, but that's what takes me back to joy and the connection to nature. And that just grows into, feeling that we've dominated and exploited nature, but we couldn't live without, we're part of the circadian rhythm. We're so connected. We are nature. We are consciousness. And so that focus continues to grow and expand. And so you can continually, if you make those micro choices through your day, be in that state of love, joy, gratitude, etc., and have great compassion to people who are suffering in the world, but have a focus of if we all raise our consciousness high enough, those atrocities are no longer going to happen.
Yeah.
It would be impossible to hurt another living being if you have a high level of consciousness. It's just unthinkable.
Yeah.
And that's the shortcut to creating a better world. Because if we look at all the problems in the world, thousands of them, and if you come at that logically, say we've got to fix A, then we've got to fix B, and then because you're looking at thousands of years, and a single human being can't possibly do that. We've got to make the jump of a shift in perspective, which every single one of us can do, because it just comes down to a simple choice of where do I put my focus today, minute to minute. And,
Yeah.
and that's so for me, ascension is simply an expanded state of consciousness where you have heightened sensitivity to blend with the oneness of nature and all living beings to live in joy. And that's available right now. Go out in springtime. Right now, you can feel that.
Yeah. Bingo. I mean, it's, the way that I look at it is the chaos that is currently present on the planet. Energy simply is. From my perspective, unconditional love is the field that holds it all together, and unconditional love is a neutral state. I just love. It doesn't matter. There's no requirement, there's no limitation. I just am. And when we allow ourselves to see that the energy is not objectively good or bad. It just is a force, and it is, again, available to us to decide what we are doing with it in concert with it, in, rejection or exclusion of it, even, because we do have the free will to fight against the current should we choose to. I depleted myself to the point of exhaustion for years doing that. But the point here being that, chaos simply is. And when I see it energetically and, I see things geometrically, when something collapses, like when we broke the atom, when you break a fundamental structure, it releases a tremendous amount of energy. And when the energy is released, it is always going to arrive as chaos first because it's just pure raw life force saying, where do you want me to go? What do you want me to do? Energy serves, and that's why I'm here. You get to decide. And if you don't live me, then I'm going to live you. And so when we look at these things that are happening, it is that choice. Is this something that's happening to me? Is it punitive? Am I being punished? Is this doom and gloom? Or is it, wow, look at all of the raw material that I suddenly have available to me that I get to decide what I want to do with? And, David Guillaume is a scholar of Kabbalah. And I've been listening a lot to him lately. And one of his big questions is, what is it to know yourself as the creator? That's really ultimately what it comes down to. And I think that ascension, in many ways, is the reclamation of that creative gift and that divine spark that each of us were granted. And to say, what am I going to do with this? I've been given the most spectacular gift that any being could ask for, that divine spark. What am I going to do with it? How am I going to use it? And I think that's the big question. And that's
Yeah, and
for everyone.
beautifully said, Amar. And also, I was talking to a few months ago, I was talking to Dr. Jude Caravan, who's a brilliant cosmologist, and she was saying in pure physics law, it's exactly as you say that chaos actually has the greatest potential for a jump in a state of being because all of the energy is freed up and turbulent. It's like a kettle boiling,
Yeah.
and it's a change of state from water to steam. So it has the greatest potential for this jump in the state of being. And also, I think when we see the collapse of the old world, and that is evidence that we are making this shift, but it's also a great reminder of we're not going to do this again.
No.
I mean, if you look at the war, the poverty, the disease, the misery, that acts, particularly since early 2020 with the pandemic, I mean, that has acted, I would say, despite all the horror that followed from that and continues, that was a massive catalyst for people to say, do you know what? We are not going to live in a world like this.
Yeah.
We as humanity are going to choose to create a more loving world because this isn't working out in
No.
any good way for anybody on any level. So,
No.
and this, I call it a kind of energy revolution because an energy revolution in terms of the physics that you've so beautifully described, but also it doesn't mean we have to fight on the streets. That's one way, you go out and you protest, you've got a placard. That's one thing you can do. The other thing you can do is the quiet revolution, the quiet energy revolution of I'm going to choose to turn off the news. I'm going to choose not to listen to the narratives. I'm going to choose not to drop into fear. I'm going to choose to live in joy from the moment my feet hit the floor. I'm going to choose to connect to like-minded people who also want to build a more loving world. All of those are mini, micro, and macro choices through my days, but it is an energetic revolution of state in
Yeah.
all of those choices that I'm making. And I do that very consciously and very vigorously on a minute by minute basis. And I know many of the people I know are doing that too, because we're just not going to do this again. We've been going around that hamster wheel of war, misery, poverty, disease forever.
Yeah.
And we've now left the tram tracks of the predictability of the old world. And this is our biggest opportunity that humanity has ever been given in any lifetime to make that jump into an ascended state of being. And I'm not going to make a pig's ear of it.
No, no, nor am I. And it is exciting because it is a choice. It is a crossroads that you can decide door A or door B. And one is the same old thing we've done for the past several thousand years. And, we see where that has gotten us. And I think, back in 2020, it was Mother Nature putting us in timeout, saying, you're clearly not listening. It's time for you to really take a long, hard look. And I think what I see as a result of that that global lockdown was collectively we began to ask some deeper questions and we began to withdraw our support. We divested our energetic support in those old institutions, whether consciously or unconsciously. And what we're seeing now is the result of that. And I think that many people would say, well, be careful what you wish for. No, I would say be mindful of it and understand that it will have a consequence. But that consequence doesn't have to be a bad thing. We are in a place where we have never been. We are ironically freer than ever before. We just haven't necessarily woken up to it collectively. And to your point, and this is something my guide said from the beginning. They said, your job is not to put out the fire. Your job is to build something new so that when the fire goes out, those who have been in it will have somewhere to go, will have another option, will have something to see. And I think that so many of us, what we're doing now is living through that example because the people that resonate with what you talk about and what I talk about may realize that we're all talking about the same 10 spiritual principles. Most of us are talking about the same ideas, but it's the lens through which it is broadcast that people are connected to, right? Someone who looks at you and says, oh, Pam reminds me of my sister or my friend or my neighbor or a colleague or someone that I can connect with. They may not love my filter, and so they connect with you. The more of us that are out there in an authentic expression of whatever that is, the more there is a place for someone who's waking up and going, I don't like this anymore. I don't want to do it like this anymore. There has to be another way. Click. There's this whole other half of society who is living in another way. I know that's quite a tangent, but what this is
I
bringing
think it's spot on. I think it's spot on.
Thank you. It's all the Mercury in my chart. I just love to flit from subject
No,
to subject. Yeah.
I think it's spot on because it's really what Buckminster Fuller was saying. He's one of my big heroes
Mm.
because he said much more eloquently than I remember, but he was basically saying, don't waste energy and time fighting the old system. Create something that is so much better, and then everybody will say, do you know, I want to go there.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah,
it's never the center. And this is something I've been talking a lot about. The center can't move itself. The consensus reality, the average is average because there's the extreme to the high end and the extreme to the low end. But the center cannot abandon itself. It only moves when those on the high end decide to push further. And that I think is where we are, is we're seeing the center move. And I understand how terrifying that is for many people. I look at my parents and they're of if you see it on the news, then it must be true, right? They're of that mindset. And I understand where they're coming from. And I understand the reluctance to abandon that very solid worldview that offered a sense of safety and comfort and stability. But that is not where the center is moving. We're moving away from that. And so to give people an opportunity to perhaps see things in a way they hadn't considered before is what I think humans do, right? That's why we're seeing Olympic records get shorter and shorter and shorter. I remember when I was a kid watching the Olympics, the idea of a 5 minute mile was unheard of. And then someone's a 4 minute mile, and now it's below 4 minutes. And so when one human witnesses another human doing something that they previously had been told was impossible or couldn't be done, it suddenly cracks open that worldview and they go, whoa, I guess everybody was wrong. I can run a 3 minute mile because she just did it. And I think that's what our duty is, to be the example, bless you,
thank you.
to be the example of what else is possible, of the other way, because not everyone is here to lead the charge, and that's fine, but I can leave the gate open behind me so that when you do reach the point where you're ready to ask a deeper question and choose something else, you have at least one example of what that could be.
Yeah, and it's a shift in the morphogenic field, isn't it? It's like the apocryphal story that literally happened of it was on a particular island in the Pacific, and the monkeys used to eat a lot of sweet potatoes, but they were usually covered in dirt. And then there's a kind of super smart Mensa level monkey who discovered she could wash her sweet potato in the sea. And that caught on across the islands without them having mobile phones and telling the other monkeys on the other island. It was just lodged in the morphogenic field. And so every moment that you and I, Amar, can live in love and joy and peace and compassion and gratitude, that is feeding into the morphogenic field and helping the collective, as you so eloquently say, shift their center to something better. So we have a great, and particularly I feel this, and I'm sure you feel it too, as somebody who's out there as a YouTuber, I have a very strong sense of spiritual responsibility that every video I put out will leave people better than I found them. It's almost like the content of, my slaving over the dates and the degrees and the minutes is the less important part. It's an energy exchange.
Yeah.
Every video is an energy exchange, and I want to leave people better than I found them. Otherwise, I won't bother.
Yeah.
So if we all can act like that with that sense of spiritual responsibility, we are just accelerating that shift in the collective to make this ascension happen even faster with even greater momentum. And now I started with this very terribly simple idea of a free 15-minute meditation on a Sunday evening. No Zoom, no tech, no recordings. People just energetically connect with their hearts around the world and, set clear intentions for highest highest good of self, etc., highest good of all, highest good of the earth, etc. And I give them kind of broad guidelines, but now we're doing that every night because people have requested that the world is in
Mhm.
such a state we do that every night. And just people are having these incredible experiences with a huge amount of telepathy between people of what they're seeing. A lot of people are seeing this grid of light get stronger and brighter and bigger across the earth every time they do that. Very tall, benevolent beings coming in, armies of them to support our efforts. And this is all for free, sitting on your sofa at home.
Yeah.
You don't have to pay anything, go on a course, go anywhere, and we can do that. Every single one of us can do that. And I can't join every night because of commitments. But if we can join 2 or 3 nights in those meditations, we are making a difference in the world. And if you can't be on the ground delivering aid to war zones, and if you're not sure the money is going to get through to the people, there is no better thing to do than that.
Yeah.
Energetically shift the collective to a higher state of being.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, we're all drinking from the same well ultimately. So what is it that you're pouring into that well? What do you want to drink in return? Because you will also drink whatever it is that you're putting out there. And to your point, it's a very simple act of just choosing to see, deciding that you're going to see something else, something different than the doom and gloom. And you don't even have to know what that is. You can just say, spirit, God, universe, whatever you call that higher intelligence, please open the door for me to see something else, for me to expand my view away from the dumpster fire into something that perhaps is a little more inspiring or a little bit more reassuring or, just more on that track of freedom and joy. I'd love to know, and I know we're getting close to the end of our conversation, but what do you think, and perhaps you would answer this through astrology or just sort of spirituality in general, what do you think as someone maybe who's on the outside looking in? What do you think is the biggest misunderstanding that people have about astrology or the spiritual life or the spiritual world in general? Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, that we've given away our power to the planets
Yeah. Yeah.
because we are the power. Um, I've had some wonderful conversations with Lee Harris, who channels the Z's, and my good friend Janet Trelaw, who channels an aspect of Dwal Kul. And both of them in their channeling, and I got goosebumps both times, said that our unique birth chart is physically, not just energetically, but physically etched inside our hearts
Mm,
as our unique blueprint. And that is where we live from. And that is because the heart is the largest electromagnetic organ. That is the clearest, most direct means for us to connect to the electromagnetic field and the cosmos out there. And so it is an it's happened that we have given away our power to everything and everybody, authority figures, governments, corporations, etc., and to the planets. And I would love people to bring that back inside themselves and say, okay, let me look at what my individual beautiful sheet of music is suggesting for me today, but I will choose how I will play it.
yeah. That's
And it's
beautiful.
that shift of sovereignty. It's that shift of focus, that shift of sovereignty. Doesn't have to be shouty, doesn't have to be. In fact, it's incredibly quiet because it's a quiet, energetic shift of focus. to what is for my highest good, and that is for me to reclaim my sovereignty in order that I can shine my light more brightly in the world to help others.
That's beautiful. Well, and ultimately, the way I see it is the planets have their own consciousness, right? That's another being that has just chosen that form for this experience. And so the planet isn't at the planetary level of consciousness to dominate or destroy. It's there to embody an aspect of all that is. And so they are simply their own being reflecting their truth back to anybody that can see it or perceive it. They're just here to show us, I have been you, you have been me. We're all swimming in the same pool. So I'm just showing you what I can reflect from my place in the sky, so to speak. So, yeah, it's not, and I think fundamentally it really, I think a lot of what I find with my work and with my clients, because like you, my goal is to get my clients to the point where they don't need me anymore. Like, I don't want dependence. But I think to realize that there is no separation. Those partitions are imaginary. There is no division. And do you see it as a punitive force that is, our father, our daddy issues that we've projected on what we call God oftentimes as this punitive, angry figure who's just waiting for us to mess up so that we can be punished? Or is it a benevolent source of love and life force that's saying, I'm giving you part of what I am so that you can have your own experience of coming back to the truth that I see, which is you are perfect, you are divine, you are me, and I am you. And I guess that's the choice.
Absolutely, and yes, absolutely, Emma. And I think also we're going to discover, and we're kind of part way there. I listened to something from Zach Bush the other day, just a very short clip. He was talking about the way we develop in an embryonic state in the fetus, and he was talking about the power of organization of our biology is actually in between the cells, and
Mm,
it's electromagnetic, and it comes from the field,
yeah.
the field of energy out there, which is partly determined by the planets. So we are going to discover, I think, and we know already it's all one consciousness. The whole cosmos is one consciousness, but the whole friggin' thing is electromagnetic.
Yeah.
It's all electric, and that's where the Aquarian energy is going to lead us. Two jaggedy lines to form the glyph. It's all about energy and frequency. And as we lose density and move further towards the light body, that is going to become clearer and clearer for us. But our own electromagnetic frequency, how that links to the probability waves of each of the planets, because I think you're dead right. They are just probability waves of consciousness, each with a different resonance or a different pitch, and together, just as Pythagoras, he intuited that it was a symphony of the spheres, a harmony of the spheres. Getting too excited here, harmony of the
Yeah,
spheres.
no, it is. It's very exciting.
And I think that's how it is. The whole thing is musical because each has its different, one is the triangle, the other is the double bass, etc. But they're all feeding into this cosmic music, and we each have our individual fractal, divine fractal of that one consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah, and to use, my parents are musicians and I played music as a child. And, when we're talking, and this is where things start to converge, I had said previously, when something is true, it's true on all levels. We can say the same thing about music. You have the octaves on the keyboard. The note C, middle C is the middle, but C is the same note in the lower octave as it is in the higher octave. It just has a different resonance. One is much slower and much denser. One is higher and more excitable and more excited. And so, regardless of what level you are seeing or experiencing something on, you can know that, oh, I could go down lower into a denser expression of this experience, or I could go higher to a more crystalline, more, free expression of this experience. But it's all the same truth. It's just our perspective is what limits or allows us to interpret it in a specific way that we define and we create. And what you had said, and I love Zach Bush. He is such an amazing source of knowledge and insight. And when he had said that, life is really the space between the atoms and the molecules, it makes me think of that quote that, and I can't remember who it was, but music is the space between the notes. right? There are
Yes, I
only
think it was Rumi. I think
was
it
it?
was
Yes,
Rumi.
okay, beautiful. And there are only so many notes in the scale, right? There are only so many letters in the alphabet, but look at all of the infinite ways that we can construct and organize and reorganize them to make these beautiful things. And the silence and the stillness is where the power lies.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
in
the
fact, I
truth.
was talking about that in a video just a couple of days ago that it's, if you look at meditation, it's the space between the thoughts. If you look at something like Buteyko breath work, where you hold on the exhale, it's the space between the breaths. There's something about this space between, and that's where the power lies, and that everything is fractal.
Yeah.
Everything's a fractal of the divine out there, and we are unique fractals. But it's so immensely exciting because I think our understanding of all of that is really going to come writ large for us in these coming decades. And it's interesting. I know that one of my previous lifetimes, which I know in quite a lot of detail, was as a astronomer astrologer called Thomas Digges, Digges, in the late 1500s, and he was an apprentice of Dr. John Dee, who was the last great royal astrologer to
Mm.
Elizabeth I. Anyway, Thomas Digges wrote 4 books on astronomy, but he was the very first person to write a paper. He's got a Wikipedia page, which is just he wrote a paper in the late 1500s when they didn't even have calculators about the fact that the universe was infinite.
Mm.
It was fractal. And that was way back, late 1500s, early 1600s. He was writing that paper. He was the very first person to propose that the universe was infinite. And now I think, maybe I can help a little to, help his work along from the grave,
Yeah.
that that's what we're going to discover scientifically in a much bigger way. And that's the Aquarian energy. And that's really exciting.
It is exciting. And something that my guys have been saying a lot lately is if you think people are rocked by the political revelations and the institutional revelations, wait until the religious revelations start to come out. And I just say, yeah, I'm going to pop a lot of popcorn for that show because that's just going to be unworldly. But I think the point being that the peeling away of these guardrails that have controlled and guided us for better or for worse as a species for the past several thousand years, that can be really exciting or it can be really terrifying because suddenly, if there is no ultimate source of right or wrong, good or bad, how do you know yourself and who are you and your accountability for your actions and your choices and what you're even putting out there from a thought perspective? That becomes even more important. And I can understand why a lot of people are terrified about that kind of freedom because total freedom requires total accountability. They're sort of, they're two sides of the same coin. It is an exciting time, and I can't wait to see what happens next. And I hope, and I'd love for you to offer something for people who are perhaps looking at the world and are afraid, or perhaps even within a spiritual mindset are looking at the astrology and saying, "Oh, that could be horrible and awful," and duck and cover. For those who are having a difficult time pulling away from the focus of fear and finding another thing to focus on, what would you say to them? What would you offer?
Um, Firstly, I would say try and get with like-minded people who are uplifting, if you can, who have similar views but are uplifting. I mean, a chap called Brady Gunn,
Hmm.
who was an Australian guy, you may know this, Amar, that at the beginning of 2020, he just had this idea of setting up stand in the park events, which means that he has locations, he suggested locations all over the world. And he has a website with that and a Facebook page. And he suggested that people gather 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning and just socialize, come together to socialize. But it helped to connect people of like mind from the early 2020s onwards. And I'm in such a group, and it's absolutely joyful. We're all different ages, completely different back, carpenters, builders, healers, but it's like a family of frequency. So if you can find a family of frequency, if you're interested in gardening, is there a permaculture group near you? Or can you join a meditation group, either in person or online? Find people because that becomes very supportive in the vision that you are trying to create for a better world. And the other thing I would say is there's so much material as we started this conversation, Amar, on on YouTube, online and Instagram, etc. Find someone that always lifts your frequency.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what they're talking about. They could be talking about horticulture or spirituality. Doesn't matter. That you resonate with and lift makes you feel better than you started when you started watching that video. And just follow that thread, because your guides, your angels will give you breadcrumbs
Yeah.
to people you connect with. And then you'll find a second person and a third person. And you'll have this sense of following stepping stones to lead you to a passion and to lead you to a better way of being. And that's what I do. So, you wouldn't need to spend money necessarily. This is, it could all be for free. But those are the things that I would do to find human connection that can support you and enable you to stay in that higher state.
Yeah. That's so beautiful because I think what it reminds me of is that what I believe is that humans ultimately, we all want the same thing, right?
Yeah.
We want to be loved, we want to be seen, we want to be connected, we want access to the fundamental resources that every human needs just to live a basic life. And for me, I come to that through food, and I have a grander vision of a community and of doing work through sharing my baking and cooking and growing my own food and sharing that with people because eating is one of the things that all humans have to do. And when we all sit down to share a meal together, suddenly the division and the politics and the perspectives and the opinions, they just don't matter anymore. If someone's starving and smells something really delicious and you have a plate of it for them, they're probably not going to care who you voted for. They're just going to want to sit down and eat the delicious food because they're so hungry. So I love that. And I think that's so beautiful that the more we can honor our humanness and know that we're just neighbors with 8 billion other humans who are also trying to figure it out and make sense of it, and to be the one who opens the door first, to be the one who says, hey, I'm where you are. There's got to be other people like us. So why don't we figure out a way to connect? I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah, and to go beyond the polarity. Because
Yeah.
if you get to politics, which I refuse to get into, you've got to choose a side,
Yeah.
red, blue.
Yeah.
And it leads to polarity. And we're never going to get to unity consciousness if we're stuck in polarity. We go round and round the hamster wheel. So go beyond that to just focus on loving community and loving New Earth.
Yeah. Yeah, it's what my guide said years ago. If resistance doesn't ultimately lead you to unity, you're moving in the wrong direction. So, yes, if you see something is wrong and you see something is egregious, stand up and say something, but also know that the goal with any protest or any resistance should ultimately be to remove the barrier between you and the other. And if it's not, then you may be wasting your time ultimately to more deeply divide people is not the point. It's not the point.
Yeah, yeah,
So
100.
I could talk to you for days. I could talk to you for hours, but I know you have a life and you have things to do. So where can people find you? Is there anything that you would like to share with people or that you're promoting right now?
Really, I'm focusing all of my energy into my YouTube channel, which is incredibly busy with lots of varied content. Sometimes I'm being interviewed, as we're doing today. Sometimes I'm interviewing other people of very different disciplines. Sometimes I'm just doing updates. So it's really my YouTube channel, which is Pam Gregory Official.
Okay.
Tons of scammers out there. Ignore them. It's Pam Gregory Official. And also, just in terms of other social media, I'm simply on Facebook. I've got two pages on Facebook, Pam Gregory Astrology, just for my astrology posts. I'm not on Instagram, that's the scammer. I'm not on Telegram, that's the scammer. So just YouTube and Facebook to keep it really, really simple. And you can, I'm posting stuff all the time. That's the best place. So I'm doing much less writing now because video is the fastest way I can share messages with people and reach a lot of people very quickly. So I've stepped back from the writing and I'm focused on the YouTube channel, and I will continue to do that for the next 2 to 3 years till we get through this big period of change. Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And I'll put all of that information in the show notes below so that people can find you online. And as we're wrapping up, and I'll just give you the floor, is there anything that you would like to share just as a parting message? Is there anything that you would like people to know, just as anybody who's watching this at any time? What do you think is meaningful for them to know right now?
Yeah, I always use a mantra when I recommend for the nightly meditations we do. Just keep a rolling mantra. If you can't think of anything better, which you may be able to do, Keep a rolling mantra is we're welcoming in an expanded consciousness of love. We're welcoming in an expanded consciousness of love, and that will serve you very well.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much, Pam. This has been such a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, I've loved it. It's been great. Really enjoyed it, actually.
Yeah.
You've asked tons of questions, and I always love that to be more spontaneous. So bless you, Amar. Loved it. And, thank you for everything you're doing in the world because we each have a unique piece of the puzzle.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
agreed. Agreed. Like you said, it's we each have our own piece of sheet music, and we're just here to be the instrument, and spirit is the breath. So use me to be the voice of love and unity and all of the things that we've been talking about. I think that's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I appreciate it, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.
Bye, everyone.